Hi, I'm Sandra, and today I'm going to be talking about The Familiar, which is the new standalone historical fantasy by Leigh Bardugo. I finished reading The Familiar last night, and it was such a refreshing, unique story. It almost had this dark fairy tale kind of ending, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but there's so much to like about this book. The Familiar takes place in Madrid, roughly 450 years ago. This is following the defeat of Spain's armada against England. It is a very dark period in Spanish history. The story is gritty and dangerous. There are a lot of shocking deaths that happen, and there were a few twists, some that you're able to anticipate and some that I just didn't see coming, and I thought that how the story was written and structured was so well done. The magic in this system was pretty unique. There was almost this hint of like Babel by R.F. Kuang, because at the heart of the magic system here, it's very centered on culture and language, and so it has that in common there, but it's, executed much differently in this book. But I still feel like the heart of that is very much the same. The Spanish Inquisition was a terrible time of mass persecution, particularly against Muslim and Jewish people. Any that were snuffed out were often tortured very brutally using torture racks, waterboarding. There was actually a waterboarding scene in the book, burning at the stake, all of the above, if these people weren't forcibly converted into Catholicism. The way that the magic system in The Familiar works, bits of song or old phrases have to be spoken aloud to wield that power, or as the main character comes to find out, like spoken in your mind. And these are just phrases of meaning. They can be in Latin and Hebrew. In this story, it's very dangerous to wield power, even saying that it is a gift from God and trying to use it in God's glory or God's name, because there's a very fine line between the type of magic that you do and then being labeled a witch or doing the devil's work. If it is in any way reminiscent of Satan or something like that, you could still just end up burning at the stake for having this power. So characters like the main female character in this book, Luzia, she's very secretive about it, and her aunt is her only living relative, Juanit, and she also has this power too. And so they're very secretive about it. They live in a way that they pretend to go to mass and to be Catholic, converted Catholic, while still, treasuring and finding deep meaning in their roots and their culture. Leigh Bardugo's writing in this book was so immersive. I don't have a lot of experience reading this place or time in a story, and the way that she writes, it's so classically Leigh, but she helps ease you into the world. You're very easily able to envision what the clothing looks like, what the food might taste like, what the environment and the music feels like, and the art. Even the character portraits, it's very Leigh Bardugo. So if you're familiar with, no pun intended, if you're familiar with the Grishaverse or Ninth House, the way that she writes these characters, it's still very apparent that these characters were written by Leigh Bardugo. And there's even a lot in parallel, I feel like, between the main characters in this book, Guillen, Santangel, and Luzia. They strike me as being almost grown-up versions of Darkling and Alina Starkov from Shadow and Bone. You have Luzia, who is a very plain Jane, downtrodden female character, and she wants power, she wants to be in the spotlight, she wants comfort, and she is willing to do whatever it takes to get those things. But once she has them, or is within that grasp, she changes her mind and learns very quickly that that's not what it was made out to be at all. All of the characters in this book are so fleshed out. Secondary characters are Valentina and Marius, who are the employers of Luzia when the story begins. They're the Ordoño household, and they live in a very well-to-do neighborhood, but their family is not very well off. They're trying to regain some social status. Basically, the plot of the story is Valentina, the doña of the house, she suspects that Luzia has power, and so she plants little traps to prove that she's correct about it. And once she confirms that Luzia has magic, she decides to start showing Luzia off at dinner parties that they start hosting at the house. One person in particular catches wind of Lucia's magic. It is Antonio Perez, who is the disgraced former secretary to the King of Spain. There is an informant for Perez at this particular dinner, and word gets back, which prompts a man named Victor de Paredes to come and become Luzia's patron. He's also the patron of Lucia's aunt. Victor de Paredes is very greedy, he's selfish, he is very lucky. They talk about his luck all the time in the books. So it's just how his family has been lucky over the centuries and become very well off for themselves. Victor decides to be patron to Luzia so that he can win this king's tournament. Antonio Perez is trying to get back into the king's favor by doing this elaborate tournament to show like holy magic wielders to him, to try and please him and get back into his good graces. And there's a little twist with that. The story was just so intricate. What I like about Leigh Bardugo's characters is kind of like in Grishaverse, like in Ninth House. The other character in this story, the male main character, Guillen Santangel, he is very morally gray. He is centuries and centuries old. He is essentially a slave to this de Paredes household, and he has the nickname the Scorpion. He's the familiar for this de Paredes family. And so he is kind of like the top henchman. So he is the undying assassin and cleanup guy and just helps maneuver this family to elevate himself more and more. He is just tied to this family and there's nothing he can do. That's kind of how Guillen, Santangel, and Luzia cross paths. Santangel is then tasked with training Luzia to make her push her power to the limits and really like dig deep and embrace it, because up until this time, Luzia has been speaking aloud and trying to hide the words that she's speaking, often in Latin or Hebrew or other languages, so that no one can know what her true cultural roots are, so that she's not persecuted. And so he is like teaching her to have the words in her head, and she'll be able to do things silently, and helping her figure out just how powerful she can be. And so what Santangel wants is he wants Luzia to win because he expects to trade places with Luzia so that he can be freed of his enslavement to the de Paredes household. I don't think this is a secret at all, but Leigh Bardugo has pitched many times that this book is very romantic, and it is very romantic. The love that develops between Santangel and Luzia is so intoxicating and angsty, and there's so much longing and tension, and she writes that so well. At times, this story felt a little grimdark to me just because there were so many characters just making really awful decisions all the time. A lot of the side characters, they're not completely bad. I mean, they're just normal people that want normal things, whether it's social status or more wealth or more comfort or freedom or whatever. But the way that they go about things, the people that they're willing to step on and enslave in a way is just, that's not something that a good person does. But so many of the characters in this story have a duality that way, which makes the whole cast of characters, even beyond just the side characters, like even the characters after that, the tertiary characters, just so interesting. For example, Valentina and Marius. Valentina, I hated her at first. You spend the first few chapters of this book living with Luzia and what her life is like. She sleeps on the floor of what's essentially like the pantry. She doesn't get to have baths. She doesn't get to have nice clothes. She has rough, calloused hands, and she's just treated like an animal. Valentina is such a bitch to her. Valentina is trapped in like this very loveless marriage to her husband that spends like no time at home. She has no children, and she doesn't even have a lot of household help. She can afford like a cook, and then she has, the scullion, Luzia, and that's it. It's interesting because as the story goes on, Valentina almost adopts like this mother kind of figure in Lucia's life. And while they don't have the best relationship, she does care about Luzia, because I think Luzia is the first one to actually see Valentina for who she is and what she wants, which is to be loved by her husband, to be in a more grateful marriage. She wants kids and doesn't have any, but that's not, for not trying or anything like that. I thought Valentina had one of the most rewarding growth arcs in the book. I have to read this part because this is what I'm talking about when I gush about Leigh Bardugo's writing. There was a part where Valentina is being questioned by the Inquisition, basically, because of all this shit that has happened in the book toward the end. Her and her husband Marius are under investigation, we'll say. And so she's having to justify their actions through this whole ordeal. And this is the part from Valentina's perspective. Her mind had been hollowed out by the ceaseless talking, by fear, by the blunt understanding of her lack of consequence. She had been deluded by pretty clothes and fine meals. She was no one, and it would take more than Lucia's miracles to change that. She wasn't even sure she wanted it to change. She was out of words. She was out of thoughts. Her mind could only form one low, long note, a bow drawn across a gut string. Back and forth, no melody, no rise and fall. My husband is a coward, she said, shocked at her own words, but too tired to correct her course. He has no political convictions. He doesn't care about Antonio Perez. He is loyal to the king because it's easy to be loyal to the king, and he likes what's easy. It's why he married me. There is no one to court and no one to impress. No work to be done. He cares about good wine and fast horses. He doesn't have the ambition for conspiracy. When Valentina said this part to the Inquisitors, I was very proud of her because it took a lot of guts for her to come out and say that. She had all of these emotions bottled up throughout the entire length of her marriage to Marius. And then she just very openly finally says this, and that was such a huge moment for her. I loved it. Some other parts that I have to talk about, Santangel had some heart stopper kind of moments with some of the way he worded some things. Luzia nearly laughed. I didn't restore you. I wouldn't know how. Every time you use your gift, every time you use me, you let me take a bit of your power for myself. Just as I make you stronger, you do the same for me. You make the blood flow in my veins once more. You remind my heart to beat. There are so many quick little exchanges like that sprinkled throughout the book that it just makes you kind of swoon for these characters and root for them. And while the ending isn't a traditionally happy fairy tale ending, it still works for these two characters and who they are. As another little flavor of Leigh Bardugo's writing in this book, during the trials, there's one of the other competitors is a guy named Fortune. He is this musician. He's in a very intense love affair with his patron, the Doña Beatriz, and he hates her. He can't stand her, and he feels like he's whoring himself out to her in order to have any kind of influence and power, and he just wants to break away from her. So this is Luzia kind of observing him, and it says, he looked beautiful in the golden light of the stage, his curls darker, his sun-bronzed skin nearly the same warm hue as the vihuela, as if they'd been carved from the same tree and polished by the same hand. Was it this profound feeling, this trembling ache between joy and misery that had lured his patroness into the olive grove? There was pleasure in this sadness. It was the feeling of remembering great happiness you will never have again. The first flush of desire you know will never be consummated, but that you can't help but hope for anyway. The desperate longing to see your beloved, even when you know you are not loved in return. This book is filled with angsty, just little unrequited moments like this. I have to talk about the ending of this book because I'm glad it ended this way because the alternative was not happy whatsoever, and I probably would have rated this book at least a full star lower. This idea that they had to die in order to live, I can stand behind that. The very final scene feels kind of like an epilogue in a way, and it says, every night she shuts the windows tight to guard against drafts, and every morning he dies and is reborn beside her. She reminds his heart to beat again, as she did so long ago. He kisses her fingers and combs her hair, and he treasures her, as only a man who has lost his luck and found it once more ever can. And I think that's such an important theme of this book because there's so much desire and want from every single character throughout the story. For many of them, it takes realizing what they had to finally appreciate what they had, or to at least recognize that what they had wasn't enough for them. And so that's able to give them the closure that they need to finally move on and find something more meaningful. And so you have all these people going after these kind of just surface level, shallow things, whether it's power or wealth or beautiful clothing, whatever it is. Everyone just kind of goes through the ringer to find who they really are on the inside and what it is they actually value and what they could live with. And it's such a great story. So I think I gave this book 4.5 stars. The very beginning, the first several chapters, didn't quite capture my attention. I felt like there was a lot of stage setting and just living in the misery of Lucia's day-to-day that I wanted the story to just kick off a little bit faster. And I didn't get that until around chapter 15 or so. And so that was my only real complaint. So, sorry, quick side note here. I will also say that at first I thought the attraction between Santangel and Luzia was a tiny bit too insta-lovey, but the more I thought about it and the more the story settled into my bones, the more I realized it just works. Reason being, for Santangel and Luzia, the power that they each had innately recognized the power that the other had, and I think that they only ever could have been each other's equals, and I enjoyed that. So I just had to quick insert there. But I thought the deaths were all horrible, sometimes unexpected, and there weren't a lot of happy endings for a lot of people here. And I thought that the ending was very fitting for what the characters went through. Yeah, I'm glad I picked this one up. Highly, highly flawed characters, but the relation to one another is always just, it like sucks you right in and you feel like you're just watching this stuff unfold. I'm not really a huge historical fiction reader these days, but I do want to get more into it. This one definitely felt like historical fiction with some fantasy elements sprinkled in, but it was almost a little more subtle, and I appreciated that. I have to mention, because somebody out there is going to be wondering if this story is spicy or steamy in any way, I will say that the book, while it has sex scenes, they're not gratuitous. They fade to black. I think that they only help elevate the story. They always feel very, very adult. Language-wise, the F-bomb is dropped quite a few times in the book. So the romance in this, very tastefully done, not excessively like overt. So I think if you like historical fiction and you like heavy themes of romance, because the heart of this story, it is a romance book. So if you've read The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, what did you think? Did you enjoy the fantasy aspects of this story? Did you appreciate the romantic elements of this story? I forget what the difference is between romantasy and fantasy romance, but this always felt like it was primarily a fantasy story in a very dark period, but the love and romance that developed between the two main characters was very much at the heart of the story. So I don't know how you would, I don't know how you would classify what genre this is, but I think anyone would enjoy the story, whether you're a fan of either. Lots to love about it. Anywho, I have a couple more books to read on my April TBR, so I still need to get into Mark Lawrence's The Book That Wouldn't Burn and The Book That Broke the World. I don't know if I'm going to get into the sequel this month, but also Emily Henry's Funny Story is coming out in like a week, so I have a lot to read, and our Amazon book club over on Story Darlings, I have to read The Ever King still, so I still have a handful of books to read. I'm feeling the pressure now because we're nearing, not just like, we're not in mid-April anymore, we're nearing the end of April, so I need to get on the ball and stop playing Final Fantasy VII. So until next time, I hope you enjoyed this discussion, and just drop your thoughts, let me know what you thought, and drop me a scorpion emoji because, okay, bye!